So today we're going to be talking about the matchmaker in MTG Arena, and this can be a bit of a touchy subject. People tend to have very strong opinions on this, so I'm going to remind you guys to be really nice in the comments below. Let's be adults, and it might be a mess, we'll find out. And yeah, we're going to break down some details about the matchmaker, how it works, what we know about it, and then the theories and what I think about those. So yeah, let's get through all that right now. Okay, welcome back to the channel. Right, today we're talking about the matchmaker. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, to make sure you don't miss out on any future videos like this. So, yes, this might make some people angry. What I think it might make some people frustrated. I have seen many comments that people have on the matchmaker, what their opinions are. But first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what the job of the matchmaker is, what we know about it, how it works in different formats, and then we will get into the controversial stuff. So first of all, the job of the matchmaker is to make sure as much as possible, this is the theory of the job of the matchmaker, is to make games as fair as possible. So like in chess, you have ELO ratings, which are a rating, which is a rating of basically that player's skill and the likelihood that they will win a game against a different player. So if you have a higher ELO rating, you're more likely to win, although obviously it's never guaranteed. Anyone could potentially lose to anyone at any time. It's just to give you an idea of how strong that player is. And I do online classes for Magic Arena as well as other things, and for kids, and sometimes you will have kids joining the class that are much more experienced than others. I'll have some kids that have played Magic Arena for like 4 years, and I'll have other ones who've just started a couple of weeks ago. So if I have a class and I have 4 kids in that class, 2 of which have played for maybe 4 years, and 2 of which are very new to the game, I have to decide how those players are going to be matched up so they can do battles against each other. Now, there's a couple of different ways I could do this. I could just do it randomly. And if I do it randomly, there's a good chance that one of the experienced players are going to be matched up with one of the new players. And I think in that case, what you're going to have is the experienced player gets kind of bored because it's about as interesting as playing against Sparky if you're playing someone who's new and playing a starter deck. And the kid who's playing the starter deck is going to get very frustrated by their opponent reanimating an Atraxa on turn 5 and just blasting them for 1 million damage a couple of turns later on. So the alternative would be, instead of matching them up randomly, to decide that the 2 more experienced players are going to play each other and the 2 newer players are going to play each other. Because in that case, they're all going to have a closer match. It's going to be more interesting. It's going to be well, much more enjoyable for them compared to just beating someone really easily without even trying, or being beaten without any chance of being able to do anything against your opponent. So I'd much rather they have more equal games. It's going to work out better for everyone. And that's kind of how things work in MTG Arena naturally. We have, just like in chess, the ELO ratings. In Arena, we have the MMR, which is the matchmaking rank. And this is something every player has. It's in secret. You never really know what it is. And it's separated between constructed and limited formats. And so the way the matchmaker will match us up against each other will be partly to do with the matchmaking rank and partly to do with other factors, and different formats work in a different way. So when we play a ranked constructed game, we'll go down here to ranked, we have our actual rank, which is, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, diamond, mythic, wherever we happen to be at that time. The month has just reset, so I'm now at gold at the moment, almost back in platinum. And yeah, we'll be matched up against other people who are, first of all, potentially in the same rank as us. So if I'm in gold, it will try to match me up against other people in gold. Sometimes they might not be, sometimes they might be higher or lower, and they won't necessarily be the same tier as us. So if I'm in like gold 1, I might fight someone else in gold 2 or gold 4. It could be anywhere within gold. But then sometimes it does go outside of gold, and it would be silver or platinum or further away as well. Because it will also take into account our constructed MMR, our matchmaking rank. If we're winning every game through gold, we might start to face platinum or diamond opponents. If we get into platinum and we're winning every game, we might face mythic opponents. That might be because I have a higher matchmaking rank by winning lots of games. It might actually be that someone in mythic is doing terribly and losing 10 games in a row, 20 games in a row, and so it puts them up against someone in platinum. And the same is true for limited. So if we go to do a draft game, we have our own rank for draft or limited. So here I'm silver at the moment because we've just reset, and I'll have a separate MMR for limited. So just like when we do a ranked constructed game, if we're doing a ranked limited game, we will play probably someone in the same bracket as us, the same rank. Probably going to be someone else in silver if I play a game right now, but it might not be because it depends also on my matchmaking rank. If I've been doing better, I'm going to face more experienced opponents. If I'm doing not so well, I will face opponents that are not doing so well. So we're kind of equal. And as an example, this actually happened to me in a limited game back when Phyrexia All Will Be One was the current set, and I had done drafting quite well in 1 month, got up to platinum something, and then the ranks reset back down to silver. And then I didn't do another draft game for a while, and then when I entered another Premier draft, I was still in silver, and the first rare that I opened in the first pack was Atraxa, and I picked Atraxa because I didn't have 4 copies already to add to my collection. And then I thought, actually, let's make a deck as best we can, just for fun, to see if I can cast Atraxa and win with Atraxa. Because if you manage to get Atraxa out in a draft game, you've probably won. So yeah, I found all the cards I could that made treasures, that would draw extra cards, search for creatures, to put out blockers as much as possible to try and last long enough to cast Atraxa. And the first game I did, when I was still in silver rank, I was against a mythic opponent, and I wish I'd recorded the game. It's a really annoying fact that I was recording basically all of my draft games at the time. I didn't record this one, so you have to just take my word for it. And yeah, I managed to basically cast Atraxa and beat them, and I was very, very proud of myself. And then obviously I lost the next 3 games because the deck just really wasn't consistent at all. But the point is, I was in silver, I was playing against someone in mythic, which might not seem fair, but I guess I had a really good run just before that, or maybe they had a bad run before that, and it just matched us up together. So sometimes that can happen, whether you're in ranked or limited. You don't have to be facing someone in the same rank. It does take MMR into account as well. And then in the play queue, if we just go to do a normal standard play game, it also takes an extra signal into account when it matches us up against opponents, which is the deck strength or deck weight. So if we're playing a cheap budget deck, then we're more likely to face opponents who are using cheaper, more budget-friendly decks as well. If we're playing something that's full of rares and mythics, we're probably more likely to play against someone else who's using that kind of stuff as well. Now, the exact formula for that isn't public information, but I would assume it works somewhere along the lines of the number of rares or mythics we have. It might also be the case that certain cards have higher rankings than other ones, so you might find that Shieldred has a higher ranking than a Fleshgorger. I don't know. Even though they're the same rarity, that might be the case. But either way, it does take that into account to some extent. So when you're playing your standard play games, it doesn't mean you have to have like the absolute best deck all the time, because sometimes you will be playing against other people. If you're using a budget deck, they might be using one too. It obviously doesn't guarantee this, but it just makes it more likely because it still takes into account your MMR, and if yours happens to be higher because you've been winning lots of games recently, then it might match you up with someone with a stronger deck because it thinks you're going to have a good chance of winning. And then we have Brawl games. Now in Brawl, it uses a similar matchmaking factor, which is a commander rating. So some commanders are much more competitive than others, and they'll be matched up together. So there are other ones that are more casual and less competitive, and they will be matched up together as much as possible, rather than matching up the basic, less effective commanders with the Traxxas, whatever else, Italis. So they want to make sure that the better ones are facing each other and the less effective ones are facing each other. Basically the same as what I would do in a class. If I had two kids who were really good and two kids who were really new, I would try and make sure they play on the same ranking rather than crossing over and having really good decks against really less effective decks. And the top tier of Brawl commanders is often referred to as Hell Queue. If you happen to hear that mentioned by someone else, that's what it means. Basically, the commanders that are decided to be the most competitive, and so they will be facing each other. They'll be the hardest matches in Brawl. So if this is the whole method, then it benefits everyone equally. It means that new players with the lower MMR records will mostly face other newer players, and veteran players or in Mythic or wherever, veteran players who just happen to have a really good win record will most often face each other as well. So I don't see any problem with that. If you're really good at Magic Arena, if you've been playing for a long time, if you have some top tier decks, you might want to play against new players if you just want to, beat them really easily and have a really easy match. That's a bit sad, really, if that's what you want to do. I'd much rather play against someone who's more of a worthy opponent than someone who's new and doesn't know how things work yet. So if you're that good, you should want to play against other people who are that good. And if you're newer, then I can't imagine any reason why you'd want to play against someone who has all the best cards. So it benefits them as well. So everyone should be happy, right? Now, the conspiracy theory here is that the game will intentionally match you up against a perfect counter deck. So if you play a slower deck, you might be matched up more against mono red aggro or something really fast, and the game will decide that it wants you to lose. I don't know how the game is supposed to decide who it wants to win or lose, but that's one theory people have. If you happen to then play an anti-aggro deck, something with lots of removal and board wipes, lots of cheap removal, something that could deal really easily with mono red, then apparently you'll never be matched up against them again. So the game will decide to match you up against, I don't know, control players, where all your removal is not much good. And that strategy is kind of wasted. Also, one thing people say a lot is that they decide to play a milling deck. And the moment they decide to play a milling deck, they'll face opponents with 250 card decks, and they'll have a very, very hard time of milling 250 cards rather than just the normal 60 cards. Now, people say this, and you see it in anecdotal evidence. People will say that's happened to them without any amount of evidence or data that actually backs up how common they think this is. I have a few milling decks that I've used recently. I have never seen anyone with more than 60 cards in their deck, apart from I had once in one of my Ashiok decks, because I didn't want to mill myself. I haven't seen anyone with more than 60 cards in a deck that I can think of in months. So I don't know how people seem to think that their anecdotal evidence speaks for everyone, or is something that's universal rather than just being bad luck. But apparently that's what happens. So the main problem with this idea is that it's completely one-sided. When you're playing a game of Magic, there can be one winner and one loser. It's a zero-sum game. Like, if there's 1,000 games played in a day, there will be 1,000 winners and there will be 1,000 losers. If there's 1,000,000 games played in a day, there's 1,000,000 winners and 1,000,000 losers. It's not like somehow more people lose if the matchmaking is weird like that and decides to match you up against people that are better than you. But also the fact that it's one-sided means that not only has the game decided that your milling deck will face a 250 card deck, but it must have also decided that someone else who's just loaded up Arena and has put together a 250 card deck gets matched up against a milling deck. And they must be really happy because it's given them a really easy game. It's going to be very hard for you to mill them out. So the game has decided to give them an advantage and you a disadvantage. But why? Not really sure why it would do that. To be honest, and this sounds kind of harsh, but it's probably true, it just sounds like an excuse for being a bad player. So sometimes it will happen. Sometimes you'll have bad luck. You'll make a milling deck and see someone with more than 60 cards. You'll have, an anti-aggro deck and face a control player. It happens, but whether it happens like intentionally, whether the game decides to match you up against someone else to punish you or to reduce your win rate because somehow that benefits someone else. That's the thing that doesn't sound right. That's the thing that doesn't really make sense. And often when you see these assumptions online, these theories, you'll probably find people have very small sample sizes. They'll say things like, I played this deck 5 times, and then I played a different deck 5 times. And I kept facing different opponents for each one. So the opponents I faced with deck A were completely different to the opponents I faced for deck B, and none of them crossed over. But this is a game where maybe millions of users play games every day, or hundreds of thousands, and they're using like 5 or 10 games as their evidence for it must be rigged because I faced aggro in the first 5 games and control in the second 5 games. It's not a very big sample size. And when you have such a small sample size as that, it doesn't mean anything. There's no like significance to that data because this is out of millions of games and we're looking at like 5 or 10. So it doesn't really make sense to say that it will decide that one person wins and the other person loses based on the match. So one theory is that if you spend lots of money on Arena, the game will give you easier matches. And if you don't ever spend money, the game will put you up against other people who can easily beat what you've got. Now the problem with this is that it makes sense without the conspiracy theory. If you're a newer player, you will probably have harder matches because you don't have all the best cards. And if you spend more money on the game, you're more likely to have all the wild cards you need to craft any deck you want. And so that would probably give you an advantage over other people generally. Like sometimes it's still not going to help, but generally you're going to have stronger cards, you'll probably win more games. That's not because the game has decided to match you up against someone who's an easy fit for your deck. It's just an advantage because you happen to have more cards to choose from. But why would the game decide that budget players have a harder time? Well, some people think that means that the budget players will be incentivized to spend money on the game because they keep losing, they don't have very good decks, they'll put some cash in the game so that they can get some more wild cards, get a good deck for themselves, and be more competitive. Maybe? I don't know if that even makes sense psychologically, because if I start playing a game and I just keep losing at it, the first thing I think isn't to throw more money at the game to try and win more. I would probably be frustrated by the game and decide to quit and play something else. I don't think making budget players or newer players lose more often is the way to get long-term players to keep coming back to the game and decide to spend money on it. Also, I don't know how you would prove that without having huge amounts of data. And I know this is a small sample size, but for my own accounts, I've played Arena for about 3.5, 4 years, and I didn't spend any money on the game for a long time, and I never saw any time where I was matched up against someone who was specifically designed to beat me in any way more than you would expect just from playing different matches over and over again. I remember losing a lot because I didn't have certain rare cards when everyone had Brutal Cathars and I didn't. Yeah, I kept losing games then. And now that I spend money on the game, which isn't even that much, it's like $5 a month on average because I get the pre-order Mastery Pass bundle. Since then, do I win lots more games? No, not really. I mean, I do okay. I get 50 to 60%. I get more than 60 in some decks for, some lucky streaks. I do pretty well. But I wouldn't say I get everything really easy now. Sometimes people make mistakes that I play against, but not hugely often. And then I have a second account that I do some drafting practice in, which I've never spent any money on. And in that account, I don't notice any difference in games when I'm playing ranked or standard play or draft games. I don't have a vastly different win rate from one account where I spend money to the other account where I don't spend money. So if it would happen like systematically, people are saying this is happening everywhere, I would expect to see at least some difference, even with that being a very small sample size. But I don't see any difference at all. So if I don't see any evidence of this, is it actually possible? I guess, in theory, I have to admit, it's possible. So the matchmaker it has access to all the information, right? So it would have access to how much money you spent through your account, the purchases you've made. It could give you more favorable matches if it wanted to, because if you're playing a certain deck that happens to be good against red aggro, if it does recognize that, which, I mean, it could be programmed to recognize that. I don't know if it does. I don't know if it even looks at what deck you're using apart from the deck strength for the standard play queue. But in theory, like if you're playing a slow milling deck, control deck, and they're playing a fast red aggro deck, it could match them up to decide that the red aggro deck is probably going to win, and let's make them go first as well, so they've got a good chance. Yes, in theory, it could be possible. But I still don't really know why it would want to, because new players would quit, but I still don't know why the game would want to do that, because I don't think that's an incentive to spend more money. In fact, I've seen people post on Reddit and Facebook that have said, if the shuffler doesn't get fixed, I'm not going to spend any more money on this game, which is the opposite to what people think the response would be. People don't spend more money on the game that they're frustrated by. They'll spend more money on the game that they're invested in and they enjoy playing. No one's going to enjoy horrible matchups like that. And then we also have confirmation bias. So there are different biases and fallacies in the logic that people use that I think people need to recognize. So people are more likely to remember the games that they lost more than the games that they won. So they'll pick the evidence that supports their conclusion and they'll ignore the rest. So if I really hated mono red aggro and I made a variety of decks and they all kept losing to mono red aggro, I would remember that because it's frustrating and it would stick in my mind, and I would think that the game is matching me up against these people just to make me lose, and I'm always on the draw. I've seen people say that a lot. Like, they seem to go second a lot more than they go first, and we're going to have a look at some data that I've got, which again isn't massive sample sizes, but it's the best data that I've got to have a look at now on whether I happen to go first or second more. So we'll have a look at that in a moment. But the fact that people have this confirmation bias where they don't remember certain games that just went smoothly and they'll remember the really frustrating ones means that we really need to have some data to prove anything. And the bigger the data sample size, the more significant it is. So let's have a look at some of the data that I've got, which admittedly isn't huge. So one thing we can look at is a few of the different decks that I have recorded in my MTGA Assistant app. And I've got a few decks that I've done a lot of games on, or maybe around 100 or more than 100 games. And so it gives us a good sample size to look at for a few different decks. So this first one is my Phyrexian Despair deck. It's basically mono black with Invoke Despair. The reason why there's white there as well is because I used, I think it was Path of Peril, so we had the white mana to destroy all creatures if we wanted to. And in this deck, we've got 70 wins, 35 losses, which is a 66% win rate. On the play and on the draw is about the same. You can see here we've got kind of 50 on the play, 54 on the draw, so that's pretty much equal. The win rate kind of goes up and down different times. I've had some times where I've had quite a good streak of wins, sometimes where I've had a few streaks of losses. Other times it's been pretty flat and equal. The games I've played, the majority of them have been against other mono black mirror decks. We've got mono red and we've got Grixis. This was because it was Invoke Despair. This was during the time of Invoke Despair, a Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and Reckon the Bankbuster. So Grixis and Rakdos was like the most common things. Mono black, mono red, obviously very common as well, quite often. And we've also got 8 games here against blue and white, which I think was majority soldiers, I think, during this time. But I don't see any like huge trends in this. I had mono blue was a bad match for me, but I only had 4 of those. I wasn't really spending any money on the game, so it wasn't giving me an advantage for spending money where it puts me up against other people that I'm really good against and not much against people I'm not very good against. So I don't know what that really proves. That's just one of the decks I've got here. Then I've got my most recent best mono red deck. 72 wins, 43 losses, which is a 62% win rate. 58 times on the play, 57 on the draw. Seems pretty equal to me. I had a massive winning streak. that got me from platinum to diamond in like 38 games. And then I had, obviously, a great losing streak, luckily just after I got to diamond, so it didn't really affect my rank at all. But oh yeah, a really bad losing streak there, and it kind of just went up and down. So very similar to the last one, some winning streaks, some losing streaks, and some where it stayed pretty much equal. The majority of the matches I had for this one, enchantments, very popular, because this is after Calyx came back. Enchantments wasn't that popular. At some point before Calyx came out, it kind of died away and came back when Calyx came out in Aftermath. So yeah, we had lots of enchantment games, 10 versus 2, 10 wins, 2 losses against them, which is pretty good. We've got other mono red, 16 wins, 10 losses against that, 26 games against mono red. And the biggest one, other than that, is 13 games against Esper Control, which was a bad matchup for me because I think they basically had cut downs, make disappears, and like depopulates or sunfalls. And obviously, mono red isn't going to be able to deal very well with that. Is there any reason to think that the matchmaking might be rigged here? Did I do really, really well here and it decided to match me up against people that were much better than me here? Probably not. It looks like it's definitely just a case of variance in the mono red deck as well. And then the third one I want to look at is my Boros Bombardment deck, one that I really enjoyed playing. We've got 66 wins, 56 losses, which is a 54% win rate. It was much higher at one point. And on the play, 57 times, on the draw, 63 times. So slightly disadvantaged, slightly more often on the draw, but still not very much in terms of like overall percentage-wise. It's only a few percentage points either way. We did really well, really good winning streak here. And then quite flat. And then since then, just losing more than winning, which is really kind of annoying. But this is like when things change, when new sets came out, and then we have the kind of losing streak along here. And there's been quite a few decks actually where I seem to have a good winning streak at the beginning and then a losing streak at the end. And I'm going to explain why I think that is. I don't think it's that the game has decided to match me up against different people. But let's have a look at the matches we have against this deck. We have most of them against mono red, where we have a really good record. It was 100% against mono red for a long time. I think I made a couple of mistakes in different games and then just lost one outright. But still not bad. 12-3 against mono red. We've got mono black, 6-6, 50% win rate against mono black. And we've got enchantments, which is just under 50%. And then we have Esper Control. I hate Esper Control. Seriously, I hate it. And yeah, 3 wins, 10 losses against Esper Control. And I had a look at when some of these games were, and it turns out that the majority of the Esper Control games are towards the end of this. So a lot of them on red earlier on, a lot of the Esper Control are later on. So we could suggest that maybe the game was letting us play mono red for a while, and we did really well. And then the game decided to match us up against Esper Control and bring our win rate back down because we were doing too good. Because I was up here at like 67, 68% for a long time up here, and the game wanted me to be much nearer 50%, so I'm at 54 at the moment. Does it make any sense that the game would decide to do that? Well, you can see that maybe the evidence would suggest that. But the problem with that logic is that that's not proof that that is the reason. That's just one possible scenario that kind of matches up with the evidence. Doesn't mean that is the actual reason. It could just be correlation, not causation. And like I said earlier, what's the reason? This is the big question. Why would Arena want me to lose more? What does it lose by me staying at 65 to 70% win rate with the deck? Has it really just decided to push me down because I'm doing too good? Or is it because decks change in popularity over time? If Esper is more popular now than it was before, and my deck happens to be weak against that deck type, then my deck win rate is going to change over time. And there's one more deck I want to have a quick look at. This is my Wilds of Eldraine domain ramp deck. So this is the kind of the old style ramp domain, which is getting out Atraxa and Atali using Topiary Stomper and Invasion of Zendikar. But this is the Wilds of Eldraine version, which has virtue of persistence and up the beanstalk to help us draw more cards. So that's what this deck is made of. And you can see my record for this. I'm very, very proud. I have 6 wins, my 100% win rate out of the 6 games. I've been on the play 3 times. I've been on the draw 3 times. 100% win rate. And it's against a variety of matches as well. We've had Golgari a couple of times. Esper, beat Esper, of course. Have to beat Esper. We've got Rakdos, we've got Other Domain, and we've got a Boros deck, which I can't remember exactly what type of deck that was, but the other one's pretty easy to work out based on the current meta. So the question is, am I doing too good with this deck that the game is going to decide to give me some horrible matchups? What am I going to lose to? Maybe a really good mono red where I don't draw enough lands. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's a shuffler, which we'll come to in the other video that will come out after this one. But yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe the game will decide I'm winning too much. But here's a different suggestion. Maybe when I've made a deck before and I've lost the first 6 games, maybe I don't play that one anymore. Maybe I give up on that deck because it's a rubbish deck. And I go on to make a new deck, and I make my Wilds of Eldraine Domain ramp deck, and I win 6 games in a row. Now, my options are to stop playing, stay ahead, stay on my 100% win rate forever, or carry on playing and see what happens. Well, the chances are, sooner or later, I'm going to have a loss for various reasons. It might be not drawing enough land, it might be drawing too much land, it might just be that I don't have the card I need at the right moment. Does that mean the game wants me to lose, or does it just mean there's variance in games? Sometimes we'll win lots, sometimes we'll lose lots. All the other decks I just looked at, we had winning streaks and we had losing streaks, and I don't think that's any evidence that the game is making us win these or lose these games. I think you just have lucky streaks and you have bad streaks. And the logical fallacy of looking at a deck that's working really well, and when it starts to drop, assuming that the game wants you to lose, is that if I went back to that deck that had like 6 losses to start with, instead of thinking it's a rubbish deck and just giving up on it, I could have carried on playing that one, and I might have found that I started winning 10 games in a row with that deck as well. Because we don't see the decks that have a 0% win rate and then come back up because we stop playing them. But we do see the ones that have the 100% win rate and eventually drop down because those are the ones that we think we're going to stay at 100 forever, and we keep using them until, obviously, averages catch up with us. So that's having a quick look at some of my own data. Like I said, not huge sample sizes. We're looking at like 100 games or so per deck, apart from the 6 with the domain deck. If I'd done 100 games with that deck and got 100% win rate, maybe I'd be onto something. But yeah, it's not quite that good yet. So I hope that's kind of answered a lot of questions you might have about the matchmaker and how it works according to the information we've got from Wizards of the Coast, assuming they're not lying about it, which some people will just say they're lying. So how can you have any kind of discussion if you don't trust any of the evidence you have? I don't know. Let's assume that what Wizards of the Coast have told us is the correct information, and anything else we can work out from that should be based on data and making logical conclusions from that data. As always, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you have any other questions about the matchmaker? Is there anything I've missed? Is there anything else you want to add on either side of the debate? Do you think it's rigged to make us lose against people? Or do you think that variance is just a thing and people need to understand statistics and averages and probabilities and just accept that sometimes you'll play badly, sometimes it's just not your day? So I'd love to hear from you. I'll try and respond to as many comments as I can. So don't forget to leave something there, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe as well, so you don't miss out on any future videos. And you won't want to miss out on the next one in this series, which is going to be on the shuffler and figuring out if the shuffler is rigged. So rather than just who we're matched up against, which cards we happen to draw on each of our turns, we get too many lands or not enough lands. Is that anything we should be worried about? Is there anything we can do to prevent that happening? We'll cover that in the next video. So thanks for watching this one to the end, and I'll see you in that one.